All right, let's go to Tim in Ventura. What's up, Tim?
Hey, Dr. John, how are you?
I'm good, man. How are you?
Good. I'm really grateful to be on. I'm a longtime listener, and you give great advice, so that's why I'm calling in.
Well, you're awesome. Hope I can keep the trend going, dude. What's up?
Yeah, I had a general question, and we can dig into specific details if it helps out.
Okay.
But my question is this: what does it mean when you say you need to grieve? And what I mean by that is, sometimes when someone like me is going through, life issues, and we're thinking, oh, I wish life were like this. I wish life were like that. If I wish, I had this kind of relationship with my family. And I listen to your show, and you say, well, you're living a fantasy. You need to learn how to grieve that loss and move on. And I'm thinking, well, that sounds great, Dr. John, but what does that mean? What does grieving look like exactly?
Dude, that's a great question. Do you have an example of something that we could use as kind of a model to work through?
Yeah, so I'm married to a wonderful woman, 16 years. We have a 5-year-old son. And part of me wishes we could have 2 children, but even having one was tough enough.
Mm-hmm.
And
what was tough about it?
So 4 years, it took us 4 years to even get pregnant. And then we had a miscarriage in the second trimester.
Mm-hmm.
It took another 4 years to have this child, a miracle child. His name's Kyle. He's a ball of energy. We love him to death. And we just couldn't go through, trying another, couple of years for a second. And I guess one fantasy I'm holding on to is I really wish we had a second child. And it's like, no, I got to grieve that loss, but I just don't know. I just don't know what that means.
Mm-mm. So let's replace the word grief for a minute with the word experience. And when we use the word experience instead of grief, we're going to be swimming upstream against a cultural current that is so powerful. And here's what that cultural current is. Feeling sad is something that you need to fix. Wishing and wanting something and admitting it's not going to happen is for losers and quitters. It's for people who don't want it bad enough. Wishing something was different is ungrateful. You should just be happy with whatever you got. And so when I say that I want someone to grieve, the purpose of grief is experience. For a moment sometimes, and sometimes for a long season. Because I don't care what anybody says. If you lose a child, there's no silver lining. There's no God needed another angel crap or whatever stupid things get stitched on pillows that people try to say. In your case, now that this happened to me. So it took us 4 years to have Hank, okay? And then we had several gnarly miscarriages. There's a whole thing. And then Josephine comes out of nowhere, okay? So a similar track as you guys were on. I didn't understand that I had the capacity for love and joy like I did until I held my son. I didn't get it. And especially, I won't even be one of those dads. It's like, as soon as I hugged him, I knew. I didn't. I mean, it was just like a yelling lump of screaming human. It evolved over 6 months, 9 months, a year, right? And so I've had the same thing, Tim. Like the thought of just having had Easter and we have 3 or 4 knuckleheads running around, like, sounds amazing. And it's not going to happen. It's not going to happen. So everything in our culture says move on, be grateful, don't be a whiner. Grief is choosing to sit for a minute or an hour or a day or a season and just be heartbroken. Let your body catch up to your spirit. How does that sound?
It sounds good, but I still more questions come up.
Bring them on. Bring them all on. Because all the questions you have are going to be really helpful to people who are listening.
Yeah. So when I hear that, I'm thinking, how do I know if I'm being successful at experiencing or grieving? How do I know
It's not a
when I'm
competition.
done?
It's great. Grieving is not a competition.
Right.
Grieving, people who compare grief. He's an extraordinary therapist. His name is Link. He's a close friend of mine, and he was one of my crisis team partners. He lost a pregnancy. That him and his wife lost a pregnancy later on than my wife and I lost one of ours. And I remember saying to him, like I was so heartbroken, and it was a mess, and in our home, and I told him, but man, I don't know anything about what y'all went through. And he looked at me and said, no, 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 no. Loss is loss. You don't compare grief, right? So there's in grief, as the great David Kessler says, it's indistinguishable. If it's unique. Everybody's grief is like a fingerprint. It's different for everybody, and that's one of the things that breaks up marriages. Is after 6 months, sometimes after somebody loses a parent, after 6 months, one of the partners is like, "All right, I'm ready. Let's go do something fun." And then the other person looks at them and just, how could you possibly breathe? I'm not there yet, right? And that's hard. It's hard. So to answer your question, there's not a right or wrong way. There's a couple of practices you can build in there. But if you're looking for it to be the answer to all things, it won't be. What it does is, you ever been out in the ocean swimming before?
Yep.
So when you're swimming out in the ocean and all of a sudden you can't touch anymore, and you're trying to like touch, and your heart just starts beating a little bit faster. And then you start kicking your legs, you start kicking your arms a little bit, and then all of a sudden there's that moment when your foot touches the ground. That's what grief gives you. It gives you solid ground to walk on again. You're still up to your neck in water. It's not like this person's coming back. It's not like suddenly your house is going to be filled with people, but you can touch again. And then you get to figure out what we're going to do next.
Okay. And then how do I know when I'm done grieving? Like I hear you say, well, you need to write a letter to the child that was never meant to be, or picking up bricks and putting masking tape on it, writing something on there and putting it in your backyard. I'm like, am I supposed to be doing those things in order to complete the grieving process?
I think it's incredibly important to have a process and a for lack of better terms, a ceremony, something to point back to. I have the names of the babies that we lost pregnancy, all 3 of them tattooed on my body. And I did it on my ribs where it would hurt the worst. And my wife and I had a small thing that we did just very privately that I won't talk about anymore. But all I have to say is you have a touchstone now. That's why every single culture has some sort of funeral, some sort of honoring of the dead, some form of honoring the passing of. Because you have to have a place to mark it. And that's why I'm really adamant that parents take their kids to funerals. Because it just leaves an ellipsis, it leaves a ... on their life, on relationships, and kids, it's mayhem. So yeah, when I tell somebody to write a letter, when I tell somebody to carry a brick around, when I tell somebody to do a thing, what I'm trying to give them is a tangible moment in history that they will always be able to point back to. This is when I put a period at the end of the sentence that was this person's life. This is what I put a period at the end of the sentence of this job, of this breakup, of this marriage, of this whatever, of this dream I had. This is when I said, this isn't going to happen. I'm going to take another route. But it's good to always have a place to point back to. So here's how I tell people, quote unquote, you're done grieving. I don't know that you're ever going to not wish that something was different. Here's the difference. I know people are ready to move on when their bodies no longer react to the story. Does that make sense?
Yep. That makes sense.
So let me, just for people listening, there was a season when I couldn't talk about, especially after the third one, I couldn't talk about miscarriages. I couldn't talk about them. I didn't want to talk about them. I didn't want to discuss them. I didn't want to bring them up. It caused my wife so much pain. It caused so much chaos in my house. I felt so inadequate because I didn't know what to do. I didn't know what to say. I was trying to solve all of my wife's problems with charts and graphs. It was just a mess. And so I didn't know what to do. And so I just didn't want to talk about it. Once I sat down and went through a formal grieving process, I entered into a season of sadness. I thought my life was going to look different. And I thought these three were going to be a part of it. And they're not. Now I'm at a place where I talk about it a lot. I can make meaning of it. And the meaning I'm going to make of it is I'm going to teach people, here's how to do life when it gets sideways on you. So my body doesn't take off on me anymore. My heart rate doesn't start beating. I don't get that warm, weird, heavy feeling in my stomach. I don't feel like I'm going to just start crying without it, right? So my body's not taking off on me. That's usually how people know. But you're never going to not wish that someone you love wasn't still with you. That's never going to go away.
And what are some exercises that I can practice where if I feel myself drifting back into that fantasy, that thing that I thought I had finished grieving, if I feel it creeping up, what can I do to kind of interrupt that thought?
So this is, again, from the great David Kessler. I think everybody who's interested in learning more about grief, the greatest book I've ever read, been a part of, seen, anything, and not been a part of it. I wasn't a part of it, but I've ever read. I've probably sold him a lot of books because I'm always giving it away and recommending it to everybody. It's called Finding Meaning by David Kessler. It's just a masterpiece when it comes to grieving. One of the key takeaways for me in that book was this idea that we culturally, we are beholden to our thoughts and our feelings. We have to do whatever they say. They get to rule our world. And so if I feel a certain way, or if a thought just pops into my head, or in your case, let's say you're going to a ball field with your you have a son or daughter?
I have a son.
Okay, so y'all are going to play Little League, and you are walking, and you see a dad pile out of a junky minivan, and he's got 4 little kids, and a 5th one is a little bit older, and your heart just drops a little bit. That moment, I always thought that I didn't know there was another alternative to that. And so one of the things Kessler talks a lot about, and I've taken what he taught and I've taught it to a ton of people who are like, the last picture they have of their kid is the funeral. The last picture they have of their spouse is the funeral. And like a lightning bolt, those pictures will zap into their head. Or somebody who is happily married and then their spouse comes home and says, I cheated on you. They have this image of their partner with somebody else, and it just shoots into their mind like a lightning bolt. They can't get that picture. They can't stop that picture from shooting in there. The moment you feel yourself starting to feel that again, that's the moment you have a choice. And usually, the best thing to do is to have 2 things by your side. Number 1, a picture to reinsert instead of the one that just popped into your mind. Not the picture of you sitting around an empty Thanksgiving table, but the picture of you chasing your son around the yard with him laughing and screaming in that waddling, wonky run that little babies do. The second thing is have a train of thought, a mantra, a thing that you say that is going to redirect your thoughts in another direction. Sometimes I'll be walking through, you've heard me say on the show, I'll be walking through the house and I'll just yell out, no, I'm not doing that. I'm not having this conversation with myself. I'm a blessed guy. I'm really blessed. And so I've got to step into those thoughts and decide I want to disrupt them. It feels really good not good. It doesn't feel good like a massage or like laughter and joy, but it's seductive to go down that dark path and to say, what if? And maybe if I had a different wife, or if my life had been different, if I had just done these things differently, it's just seductive to go down that route for 100 different reasons, but it doesn't serve anything because it's not reality.
Absolutely. Yeah, that's something I am working on myself with exactly what you said. And I guess I'll end with this. Are the 5 stages of grief real? Are those feelings, or, are those things that you have to experience for grief to kind of run its course? Or I'm not really too sure about that.
Yeah, I've heard it said they're descriptive, not prescriptive. meaning it's a framework. But there's been research that suggests they're no good. For me, they give me they're like floaties in the ocean. When I'm grieving something, like we have words like for anger. Well, anger for me is a whole process, right? It's a whole day. And then sometimes I'm grieving something little, like I wanted to be there on time so I could meet my daughter when she got out of school. I'm not going to make it. I'm not angry. I'm kind of sad. I'm kind of pissed off that I have a job that had a deadline that I couldn't, right? Or denial. Like some people go through wild denial, right? They start going to do laundry of their husband who passed away, and they fold in clothes and put them in the drawers, right? And then some people's denial is like, I just don't want to look at that paper because I know I know that's the death certificate. I don't want to see it. So I think they're good touchstones, but anybody who's like looking to do a checklist for grief is going to be disappointed because the grief doesn't work like that. So maybe the best gift I could give you is this. You sound like an analytical guy. You sound like a guy who wants to make sure he's doing things the right way and honoring his wife and honoring himself and honoring his child and honoring whatever situation you're grieving. And the way you do that in your work life and your regular life, and I may be out to lunch here, so tell me if I'm wrong, but the way you do that is you make sure you account for all the variables. You're probably great in Excel. Is that right?
Yeah, you hit it right on the head.
Okay.
Like Myers-Briggs, I'm ISTJ, Enneagram 6, super security focused.
There you go. So here's what grief looks like for you. Open both hands and hold them as high as you can. Let go. What you're trying to do is control a tidal wave. And you can't. You got to let it wash over you. And it feels like grief will kill you, and it won't. It feels like it will drown you. It feels like it will take you out to sea, and it won't. The last thing I'll leave you with is this, dude. And again, thank you so much for these probing questions. These are really important questions. And they're ones that I need to do a better job of explaining on the show. Sometimes I just blow by some of this stuff because I've been through it so much. You cannot, under any circumstances, this is physiological, this is psychological, this is spiritual, emotional, whatever AL word you want to attach to this. You cannot do grief alone. As David Kessler says, grief demands a witness. So sitting down in front of somebody else and reading the letter you wrote to the kid that you're not going to ever have. That's when the healing journey begins. Telling somebody, I really wanted this marriage to work and you cheated on me and it's over now. That's when healing begins. Grief demands a witness. You got to have other people in your life that you can talk to. Thank you so much for the call, Tim. You've just helped a whole bunch of people by being vulnerable and open.